I'm going to give you guys a little commercial here real quick. So we are going to finish up me talking a little bit about the foundations of our government and how we relate to our government as Christians. Next week, we're going to start a series called How to Be Perfect. And it's going to be based on a lot of the different areas in the New Testament that talk about being perfect. And actually that is the very word that the New Testament uses. And so it is a surprising word, so it's a word that we have to really wrestle with. But and we're going to sort of set that up a bit today, but I'm going to just, again, finish out a little bit of what we're talking about, how Christians, we relate to government, particularly in the United States of America, because every Christian is going to have to relate to their government differently, because there are all different kinds of governments, right? So this is what I would like to start with, and this is going to seem like a really weird way to start a sermon like this, but it is actually incredibly important, and that is this book, Hind's Feet on Hind's Places. Oh wait, no, Hind's Feet on High Places. There's no Hind's Places. Hind's Feet on High Places. This is a book written in the 20th century by Hannah Hurnall. And it was a very famous book when it was written, and she really does have an incredible story. She was a missionary in Israel before even Israel existed there, before 1948, and as that kind of came into being, she was there. She's a very, very interesting story, particularly how she came about writing this book. And I would recommend this book to you. It is an allegory about walking with Christ. But what's really so good about this book is it helps you understand a lot of what we all tend to feel and experience, but we don't really talk about a lot, which is really being afraid and the things that we are afraid of. And in fact, the main character of the story starts off, and her name is Much Afraid, okay? So she is much afraid, but she does end up following the shepherd, which is a picture for Jesus, and she ends up following the shepherd to the high places. Now, when she does this, she's taken to the high places, to these mountains, to the foothills of the mountains, and the shepherd leaves her, but he says, I'm going to give you two companions, and the two companions that are going to see you through to the high places are suffering and sorrow. And of course, her heart drops, and thinking, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I don't want suffering and sorrow in my life. I don't want them to be my constant companions. I don't want that. How in the world could suffering and sorrow bring me to the heights of what it is that you would have for me? What in the world could you do? Now, so because she is much afraid, and when you are much afraid, what are you much afraid of typically? Suffering and sorrow, right? And you can read the book, but it's all kinds of different journeys that she goes on, Much Afraid goes on. But finally, it gets to the end of her journey, and it really is the biggest challenge yet. The biggest challenge is she is going to have heart surgery. And what that actually means is she is actually going to die. She has to be willingly on an altar to be killed by heart surgery. Now, what's interesting about her allegory here is she submits to this death on an altar, and what she dies to is not to sin, but to the love she wants from human beings. So the love of man is what it is that she wants. And this is not a bad thing. The acceptance and love of human beings is not a bad thing, is it? But actually, she sees this, Hannah Hurnall sees this thing as the thing that is actually keeping her from trusting God. And so she has this heart surgery, and she's given a new heart. And what is ripped out of her chest is the love that she desires from human beings. And what was replaced with it is the love that comes from God. Now, this is something that is going to happen to you if you are very serious about following Jesus. And you're thinking, why in the world are you telling me this story based on how Christians relate to government? Well, Christians throughout history have had to stand up to governments at every generation in order to be a prophetic voice to that government to say, ultimately, you are not the authority. You are under authority, and that God is the one who gives you authority. Now, most of the times, Christians, when they're doing that, are not doing that from a position of authority, right? They're just a position of being prophetic and saying, thus saith the Lord, right? You shall not do this. Why? Because Jesus is Lord. How well often do governments take that message? Poorly. When Christians are persecuted and killed, generally speaking, it is by governments. Y'all know that. It is by governments. It is lawful killing of Christians because they stand up against governments. Okay? If you don't stand up against governments, you probably will not die, right? But Christians throughout all generations have had to stand up to governments and say, nope, Jesus is Lord, you are under authority too. And that has gotten them in a lot of trouble. And it actually has gotten them in a lot of trouble with quote-unquote Christian governments, right? We all know in Europe, in the coming out of the Middle Ages and in the Reformation times of the Reformation, it's kind of 1500 onward, that there were lots of Christian governments where had a lot of laws against even translating the Bible in the vernacular. And if you translated the Bible in the common tongue of the people, you were burned at the stake. If you ever heard of a Tyndale Bible, it was because the guy, Tyndale, tried to translate it into English so that the people could read it. And the Christian governments at the time said that's illegal, and they burned them at the stake. Okay. So, you got all kinds of ways that that Christians are going to have to stand up to governments. And I talked about last week, one of the geniuses of our government is that we will say that we are fundamentally built on the idea that even Christians in government need to be restrained. That's why you have 3 branches of governments. That's why you have a federal government and a state government. That is why we have what we have. We have all kinds of checks and balances, even against Christian rulers. Not because Christian rulers are bad. Christian rulers are actually very good. We'll see that here in a second, why that is. But even Christian rulers, Christian leaders, need to have their power checked. Why? Because they are still human beings, right? And human beings can go wrong in all kinds of ways. I think you guys might have heard this before, but of all, pretty much, I think of the founding colonies, 11 of the 13 founding colonies, or the founding states, all had in their state constitution a specific church that they were a Protestant church that they had kind of centered around. These were many of the leaders, most of the leaders that founded our country were what we would now call evangelical Christians. Evangelical Christians. And so they are people that are going to be people who believe that Jesus is Lord. And what are they doing? What are they doing? They're saying, we are going to even check our power. Right? We are going to check our power. And we're going to write it into the laws of what government cannot do. Okay. Now, we have benefited from that greatly. We have benefited from that greatly. One of the reasons this is, and I would actually, I'm going to say this, it's going to sound weird, but you probably didn't learn this in school. I certainly didn't learn this in school. You and I are really benefiting in a lot of ways from a Christian government. But it's not a Christian that says, Jesus is Lord, believe or die. Right? That's not the Christian government you're under. You are under a Christian government that says human beings are sinful. And absolute power can corrupt absolutely. And there needs to be checks and balances. On government, first of all, we need to check government. Okay. Now, we, very close to the same time that we founded our nation, you know another nation was founded as a democracy? And that was France. France went through another revolution. You guys know there was a French Revolution? Now, one of the revolutions of France was also a revolution from Christianity. And what was the outcome of the French Revolution? Heads rolling. Literally, heads rolling. We can actually see the tyranny of democracy from the French Revolution reacting to the tyranny of a king. And you can see the tyranny of democracy that was not rooted in Christianity. Because Christianity was one of the things they were trying to get rid of. And they did, and what did they get? Lots and lots of death. And so we are very much beneficiaries of a Christian government. But it's not, again, a Christian government that writes in Jesus, believe Jesus is Lord, or go to jail. It's not that, is it? It is actually a government that is informed by how the world is and is described in what the Bible tells us about. Now, let's go let me say something real quick about this too, before we get into it. One of the things I learned growing up in school, and maybe it wasn't something necessarily that was just taught, but it was more caught. What I learned when I was growing up in school is it would be very, very dangerous to have church and state united. It would be very, very dangerous for that to happen. And one of the great things about our founding is that we have a separation of church and state. And what I think is good about that is that the government, Congress specifically, can never pass a law that says this is how you got to do baptism, this is the kind of church you have to go to, that you even have to go to church, this is how you should do baptism, and if you don't do that, we're going to send the police after you, we're going to send the National Guard, we're going to do all that kind of stuff. I love that. There's no religious test for office, right? Congress shall not pass a law that will establish a religion of the government, right? That is a great separation of church and state. Y'all with me on that? I hope you think that's true too, all right? I hope you think that's true too. What I think they often meant, though, was a separation from the state from any kind of morality that came from religion. Let me say that again. A separation of any kind of morality that came from religion. Religion is okay as long as it's private, but religion does not have a place in the public sphere. We cannot have as truth any religious truth. Religious truth is not fully true because there's all kinds of different religions. How do you know which ones are true? How can we do that? How can we ever say that? And so since it's like that, we can't bring in religious truth to tell us how it is that we should be governed in our laws and our morality. We need to go to another place to find a consensus of what is moral and true. Y'all with me on that? So often now, when you hear people talk about the separation of church and state, they don't mean that the government shouldn't establish a religion or an official church. What they mean is a full way of keeping religious morality out of public life. Okay? Now, here is the main problem with that. is every morality, every law, which is law is just based on morality. That's all law is based on morality. Most of what we take as moral does not come from scientific knowledge. It comes by faith. Not religious necessarily, but it comes by faith. What we say is right, moral, good, beautiful is things we cannot prove by science. The atheist can't prove them by science. We can't prove them by science. We all base our morality on faith. If you believe in human rights, which I hope you do, and in America we definitely benefit that we are endowed with inalienable rights, right? That we get from who? Our Creator, right? The pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. Is that what it is? The pursuit. I feel like I should know that. Anyway, so we have all these rights from our Creator, right? Now, most atheists in the United States believe human rights exist. Now, why can they prove by science that human rights exist? In fact, I would say it's the opposite. If you are going to take by the observable nature of things, when you look at nature in and of itself, you do not find human rights. You do not find rights at all. What do you find? The survival of the fittest, where the powerful dominate the weak. And we see that if you look at nature, what do you see? The strong eat the weak. And if you were to look at nature and say, this is how things are in nature, and this is how things should be for humanity as well. People don't have rights. What they need is power in order to get what it is they want. And the weak are just the weak. They're just going to be taken out. That's what you see. That's the observable world in which we live. But there is no atheists who believe that we're just here by time and chance, that we're here by just natural selection, who thinks that humans should govern their life by the powerful lording it over the weak. That powerful humans shouldn't lord it over the weak. In high schools, powerful countries shouldn't dominate weak countries, right? By force. We shouldn't do this stuff. We see that as immoral. Well, that has got to come from a place. Somewhere, that kind of knowledge has to come from someplace else. An unseen realm. And what is that? It is faith. So we as human beings cannot escape faith as a way to determine morality. It doesn't matter if you're a Christian, you're Islamic, you're an atheist, you're an agnostic. We all take these fundamental things about what we say is good, right, and beautiful, and they cannot be proven or found by science or knowledge. In fact, science, the observable universe, the observable world, would actually be something that would speak against what we would call human rights. And you guys know there are lots of countries in this world that do not believe in human rights. What do they believe in? They believe that might makes right. If you look at China, they have killed tens of thousands of people in the last couple years who just happen to be Islamic. Okay? And if you know anything more about that country, that they kill their own people time and time again. And when Mao rolled into power, it makes Hitler look like he did something very, very small compared to the amount of people who died. Stalin and Mao make Hitler look like a nobody if you're just talking body count of people who died. What was their belief system of communism? Atheism. What is atheism? And hey, at least they're consistent. Might makes right. How many of you want that? I don't want that either. But you can't escape faith. And that's why Christians need to be brave in this world to help educate people and say, listen, I'm not necessarily just going to argue for my religious morality first. I'm going to argue that you don't even know what you believe. You think what your morality comes from logic, and mine comes from faith. And since mine comes from faith, we shouldn't bring it into the public sphere. No. We're both bringing our morality in from faith. We're both bringing our morality in from faith. And we live in a world that I believe has not officially ever said that you must be secular in order to be a good ruler in the government. I don't think anybody's ever said that, but we catch that in all kinds of different ways. Okay? And here as a Christian, you're going to have to take your stand, and I'm going to have to take my stand and say, no. Secularism is not a qualification for government. In fact, it is a terrible thing to believe. In fact, if you believe it, we will be a people that will be dominated by the might makes right, the powerful over the weak. We do not want that. Secularism will do that, though, right? And they will try to bring about justice in order to make that in order to bring that to their rights. That's why, guys, secularism typically looks at the self and says the self and its desires are the most important thing to us because that's all we have. We are just a self. And what is the kind of the thing that drives happiness for the self? Well, it's the desires of the self, our self desires. They don't necessarily have to be selfish. Just our self desires. And so we need to create a society in which that the self can have its desires. Are you pregnant with a child that you do not want, that's going to hurt you, you think, economically? You can kill it while it's still in the womb. If you don't like a person of another color living next to you in your neighborhood or in your city, you can draw up some laws and some boundaries and some ways of making it that you're just going to have your own racial community. Is that good? No. But there's got to be something else. There's got to be another authority somewhere else that says, no, this is wrong. This is wrong. And you're not going to appeal to science. You're not going to find it in science. Where are you going to find it? You're going to find it by faith. And that's why Christians have to say, when you say Jesus is Lord, you are making a political statement, right? You are making a political statement. You're not making a Democratic statement. You're not making a Republican statement, right? I heard a pastor say this week, he said, I don't worship the donkey. I don't worship the elephant. I worship the lamb. All right? I thought that was such a great phrase. Okay? But when you say, I worship the lamb and not the elephant and not the donkey, then you're going to know that you are coming against the powers that want the power of government in order to continue to enforce their ideology, and which is going to be not good, which is going to just take courage. And it's going to take, you need to take a stand. Now, I know, and you're thinking, you might be thinking here, Dave, you're talking to about 60 adults here in this room who mostly are retired, all right? And those of you who are not retired are just tired, okay? Now, and like, what in the world is you saying this even going to do? Right? You're not in the halls of government, right? You're not in the halls of power, right? When it comes to power, political power, we're just a bunch of nobodies, all right? Why in the world would I even talk about this? Since feels like we can't really do a lot about it. Well, I think you would be mistaken that we can't do a lot about it. And one of the things that we must do is we must stand against evil. We must stand against evil. And one of the things that is going to happen when you stand against evil is you are going to be threatened with loss. Okay? You're going to be threatened with loss. And I don't know if that's going to be losing your job. I don't know if that's going to be losing reputation at school. I don't know if that would be losing money, maybe losing freedom, going to jail, or you might just find yourself murdered by being on the wrong side of a political idea, whatever it might be. You're going to come up against something that is going to bring about, or at least threaten, loss. And most Christians, myself included, don't feel like they have the resources to be able to face loss and still do the courageous right thing and stand up against evil. And I want to let you know, guys, secularism is evil. And the reason why it's evil is because it will tell you you must give yourself over to your desires. And when you have any kind of reality in a world where the giving over to your own desires is what would rule the country and would rule and dominate our minds, the weakest amongst us will suffer. And it will be, it'll be the kids, it'll be the elderly, and we're going to have a world, it'll be the poor, it'll be the marginalized. And what you're going to have flood in is the desire for money, which is really truly a desire for power. And what you're going to find yourselves in is just a wicked place that seems like it's doing what is right, but because we've lost all sense that Jesus is Lord. Self and its desires are not Lord. Well, that brings us to this place here in 1 John, which I think is a really important thing for us to know, to be constantly reminded of how we fight fear. If you're going to stand up to racism, if you're going to stand up to abortion, if you're going to stand up to the rich using the courts to hurt others and to just continue to enrich themselves, if you're going to stand up to anything like that, it's going to take lots and lots of courage, and it's going to also butt you up right up against your desire for the praise of man, your desire for the love of man, your desire for things to be safe, your desire for things to be just happy, whatever it might be. And it's going to be particularly worse because now you're not just going necessarily against an individual. You're going against a government that has lost its way. And so what do? Well, let's read this here. 1 John 4, he says, "By this we know that we abide in him," that's in God, "and he in us, because he has given us his Spirit. And we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be Savior of the world. Whoever confesses that Jesus is the Son of God, God abides in him and he in God. And so we have come to know and to believe the love that God has for us. God is love. And whoever abides in love abides in God, and God abides in him. By this, love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence for the day of judgment, because as he is, so also we are in the world. There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear. For fear has to do with punishment, and whoever fears has not been perfected in love. We love because he first loved us. All right. John is saying an amazing thing here. He's saying that what needs to be the main reality of your life is the love of God in your heart. Okay? Is the love of God in your heart. And if you love, you abide in God, and He abides in you. But then he says this astounding thing, which if you've read your Bible or heard of sermons a time or two, you probably know this verse in 17. By this, love is perfected with us, so that we have confidence for the day of judgment, because as He is, so also we are in the world. Verse 18, there is no fear in love. Perfect love casts out fear. Whenever you get into political arguments, whenever you bring in political truths that other people are going to necessarily disagree with, that's why a lot of Christians want to punt away from politics, right? Because it's something that almost is immediately disagreed with. And then there's a fight and there's conflict, right? And it's easy for us to just go, well, I'm just going to concentrate on Jesus and His salvation and tell Him, and you should concentrate on all of that. But it is weird that Christians throughout all times, all places, all centuries, since there has been a thing called Christianity, they are the ones that are, when they are killed by governments. And they're not just killed by governments because they're doing evangelism and telling people about Jesus. It's that when they tell people about Jesus, people become Christians, they believe Jesus is Lord, and then they look at the Romans exposing baby girls. Oh, it's a baby girl. That's not going to help me with my inheritance. All right, take her to the dump and expose her, and she'll die. And Christians, what do? They walk over to the dump, and they take that baby, and they say, we're going to take care of this baby girl. And you know what I'm also saying? We should not let that be legal. Well, who are you to tell me that something like that shouldn't be legal? We're talking sons, we're talking inheritance, we're talking, that's just how things go. It's hard living in this Roman world that we have here. They didn't call it the first century, but in the first century, right? It's hard living here. There's all these kinds of pressures, and I can't have a baby girl around. Who are you to say that I can't do that? I'm telling you, you can't do that because Jesus is Lord. What? Hold on. Caesar is Lord. No. Jesus is Lord. Hey, then you call the police, 911. Hey, Secondus over here is saying that Jesus is Lord and not Caesar. And what happens to Secondus? He's going to go in front of about 30,000 fans as they watch him get mauled by a lion. And you know what the Christians do? They say, it should not be legal to get mauled by a lion in a stadium. Who are you to say that we can't do that? Why would you even say that? Jesus is Lord. Wait a minute, I thought Caesar is Lord. Now, what you and I are going to come into a problem is when we say Jesus is Lord and we say secularism is not Lord. A naked public square that thinks that morality comes by logic. It doesn't come by logic. It doesn't come by science. That's not how that happens. Morality comes by faith. You cannot separate religion and morality because everybody takes their morality by faith. You can't do it. You just can't do it. But you know what? How kindly are people going to take to you standing up against secularism, which is the God of our age? Do you not know that? Secularism is the God of our age. And it's a hard thing to do. But you have access to a perfect love that drives out fear. A perfect love that drives out fear. Now, when we talk in the next few weeks about what it means to be perfect, we're going to explain a little bit more how this gets into your life. How the love of God gets so into your life where you will notice that you do not have fear. That you don't have fear to go up against the powers and principalities of this dark age. You are literally going to experience that, okay? But what is really refreshing about all this is that you will also find that all of your contemptuousness for people who disagree with you will melt away. When it comes to politics, when it comes to arguments, when it comes to disagreements, when it comes to those things, you know how a lot of people don't care what other people think, and they'll just say what it is they want to say, and they'll maybe even speak the truth and say what it was to say. And they oftentimes at least appear like they don't have fear. What's driving that is contempt for the other person. How could you believe this? You're an idiot. You're a fool. And you puff yourself up by bringing them down. And that can look like no fear sometimes. But if you do not love, you are not from God. You can speak the truth without fear in such a way that you do not have contempt for the other person doing it. That's why one of the reasons I like Martin Luther King Jr. so much, of how much that what they did with the nonviolence and the sit-ins and other things like that. What they did by that was they basically just brought to light the incredible injustice that was happening, but they were doing it in a way that was silent like Jesus. It didn't have contempt for their enemies, even though they had every right. Gosh, I mean, to hear about what it is like Bull Connor and others did down there. Terrible. But what it is they learned from Jesus what it means, and they did not have contempt for their enemies. They actually fought it with love. They fought it with love and nonviolence. But in politics, particularly Republicans, particularly Democrats, people who care particularly about their side, a lot of what their side is driven by is contempt for the other side. That is not an option for Christians. That is never an option for you. Ever. Why? Because you are showing yourself to not be from God. And it actually shows you probably are very much gripped in a state of fear. That I have to use the tools of the flesh, the tools of the world, in order to put you down, because I can't have you have that. And that is all the seeds, or maybe even a plant full grown, of tyranny. That you cannot let people have freedom if you're looking down on them. Now, we probably know that lots of people who don't like Christianity, don't want it in the public sphere, want a secular world, have fully drank deep of the drought of secularism. They have contempt for us. But it is not an option for you or for me to have contempt for them. We do not insult them. Why? Jesus says, if you say raka, which is an insult in Hebrew, or maybe Aramaic, it says, you are in danger of the fires of hell. Why? Because, and I've told you this a million times, but if you insult other people and you're contemptuous of other people, even your enemies, you will love the superiority that you've built up in your mind. You will love how it feels to own the libs or to own the right, or you'll just love hatred. And you'll love being prideful and better And you'll find all kinds of ways to take people out and insult them. And you're going to end up, by the end of your life, being a person who loves yourself. The fires of heaven I believe, are hotter than the fires of hell. And you are going to find yourself, if you are a contemptuous person at the end of your life, doesn't matter what you say about Jesus and what you think you know about Jesus, is that when you get to heaven and you get to stand in front of God and you see somebody there in heaven who you're contemptuous of, you will say to God, no thanks. I can't be in a place where you'd let that person in. And you only got one other option. It is serious that we do not be people who are contemptuous even of our enemies. We do not insult them, but we love them. And it is only the love that comes from God that sows into our hearts. We're going to have that Hannah Hurnall much afraid heart surgery. And I'm not going to tell you that it doesn't hurt. It hurts. You ever been around somebody who has heart surgery? You ever been around somebody who's had heart surgery? My mom had heart surgery, I think 20 years ago. And she had quadruple bypass surgery. 20 years ago. And when I went and visited her in the hospital, and I've seen this again and again and again and again with people who've had heart surgery. What are they like? They're very weak, but they're grateful. They're weak, but they're grateful. And you're going to have heart surgery, and you're going to not like it when God says, I see that contempt, I see that insults, I see the way that your bitterness towards people who don't respect you the way you want to respect, or to the people that hurt you. I see your unforgiveness. I see all that. We're going to have surgery on that, and you're not going to like it. But you're going to submit to it, and when you submit to it and God takes that out and puts his love into your heart, what you're going to be is you're going to be weak, but you're going to be grateful. Because now all of a sudden you've got 1,000 pounds of unforgiveness and hatred off your life. And you will be a person who can speak truth and look at the face of loss and say, it doesn't matter what I lose. I have my Heavenly Father. But this cannot be. This cannot be. These laws are unjust. We cannot continue down a path where our governments continue to enforce at the edge of the sword somebody's desires and what it is that we must be. We should never, and we have to stand very, very clear that we got to stand against government taking away rights that God has given. Okay? We should stand up as Christians for the freedom of the press, for the freedom of assembly, for the freedom to worship how it is you want to worship. These are wonderful, for the freedom of speech. We as Christians stand for that, and we fight for that, and we say we can do that as Christians. Why? Because we have a Christ who forgives. We have a Christ who forgives. And we have a Christ who, even when we hear something that we disagree with vehemently and is horrible, we never say or think, that person needs to be shut up by the point of the sword, by laws, by armies, by police, even if we disagree with it. That freedom is a place where then we can then share the gospel of Jesus Christ and let his kingdom be sown in like leaven in bread. Like leaven in bread. And I believe we are in a time, I'm going to finish with this. I believe we are in a time right now where the kingdom of God's leaven is starting to see our culture rise. And it is beautiful. beautiful. And one of the reasons is because secularism's leaven, you look at it, and all it is moldy bread. Secularism has finally, I think, had its bankruptcy. Not everybody knows it. Some people are still clinging to the bankrupt. But I think it is showing itself to be what it is. Brutal and harmful to people. And we have a chance, I think, to be brave. But we're not brave because we're contemptuous. We're brave because we've been affected by the love of God. And in such a way where you can have confidence going to speak the truth, even in the face of loss, because the love of God has driven out fear in your life. And that's what the next few weeks are going to be, is how God sows that into you, how that happens. And I hope that you come away from those set of sermons in a way very confident before God and others, in order to be a person who is no longer racked by fear. But you're not just racked by fear, a person that's free from fear just so you can have a nice life. You're free from fear so that you can love, even in the hard things, particularly of standing up against evil.